welcome to The Division and my review of this incredible MMO experience from Ubisoft. And I'm going to be structuring this in a more traditional kind of review format than my initial impressions video, where I just rambled on. I'll probably carry on rambling, but anyway, this is my review of the game. Now, the first thing to mention is that I've been playing this now intensively over 2 characters for about a fortnight and put a huge amount of hours into it, so I think by now I've got a very good grasp of the game mechanics, what the game has to offer, and I will conclude with a score and my overall opinion of the game. But let's just kick off straight away with possibly the most notable thing about the game, and that's its graphical presentation. So, in a nutshell, The Division is an extremely beautiful, well-crafted game. It's as you can see on screen, it doesn't really matter what resolution you'll be watching this on YouTube, it is visually very impressive. The detailing, as I said in my initial impressions, is second to none. You could see the litter floating around there. Every aspect of game design has been implemented to near perfection. I don't believe in perfection. The only thing that's perfect, as far as I'm concerned, is nothing at all. But this is close to the highest standards we have seen in game production this generation. It is on parallel with Metal Gear Solid 5 in terms of world building, on parallel with Grand Theft Auto 5. It is just, and also The Last of Us. It's just amazing, and you can wander around the environment all too quickly sometimes. So this game at many points will just, if you're like me and you appreciate these kind of environments, it will force you to slow down, and rather than sprinting around like this, you'll be jogging, you'll slow your pace down just so you can look at the amount of detail and attention, the amount of dedication and care for this project is obvious. And being a faithful recreation of Manhattan and some of the areas around it, it's truly staggering. Now, I don't feel there's really any inconsistency in that level of detailing, because the environment changes even though it is the same idea. Being a city, cities have different districts, different neighborhoods, and that dictates what's going to be implemented in each. But really, every object you look at this lamppost, for instance, it's so beautifully ornate. And you can say that, well, okay, these things exist in New York, and they will have based that on those particular objects. But having said that, the standard of craftsmanship in the modelling is incredible. The animation team have done an incredible job as well. The animations are really lifelike and realistic. There's none of this floating around that you find in Destiny or anything like that. No, you know, like you can see my character jogging along here, trying to get the camera to face her. It'll flip like that when I go into that animation mode, and the sprinting is very realistic as well. She lunges forward a little bit to go up on her toes, which is what you do when you sprint. Incredible. The detailing of what she wears, or he, depending, you can be either male or female in this game. It doesn't make any difference to the way you play. Is just amazing. It's the standard of Tomb Raider. It's, you know, you can see every little aspect, and every time you change some gear, whether it's the gloves, whether it's your plate, your armor plating, or your jacket, or anything like that, you see the effects and lots of colored variations and things like that. So graphically, this game is one of the best of this generation, and what's particularly very impressive is that it is an online MMO. So what Ubisoft have managed to achieve here is on par with Final Fantasy XIV and beyond that, on par with Grand Theft Auto 5 online and beyond that. So they've pushed past all that, on par with one even beyond Metal Gear Online, as the size of the environment and things to do. So absolutely incredible. So that's the graphical presentation. Now we're going to go on to the gameplay. So in terms of gameplay, the fluidity is pretty good. Like The Last of Us, the options are all on the fly and pretty easy to learn in terms of in terms of the controls, the control mapping and everything like that. There's nothing overly complicated about the base gameplay. All the controller mapping on your controller makes sense and is easy to pick up. So you have the standards of most shooters, which is using the trigger buttons, L2 to zoom and R2 to fire. You have your abilities on the shoulder buttons, R1 and R1, which you pick up as you progress through the game. The cursor keys show you menus, just like in The Last of Us, like that. You have emotes, and the accessible menus are really easy. You have the map, which is on the big touchpad. The map is extremely well presented and detailed. You can get some idea of the huge scope of the game. All the districts, this is completely zoomed out. If I zoom in to the street level, you can start to see the scope.
I've got a situation.
And go all the way to the end of one side. Like that, you see how big this game really is. Absolutely huge. I'll zoom out again. Let's see the relative speed of going around that. These areas, I would imagine, will be expanded upon perhaps in a future date, but it really doesn't make much of a difference to the game whether or not they do or not, because there is certainly enough to do in the game. Now, being a cover-based shooter, there are quirky moments with gameplay, just as you would find in The Last of Us, just as you would find in Metal Gear Solid Online, and that's when the action perks up and you have an awful lot of things you want to deal with very quickly, and you'll find that sometimes the game is sluggish to pull you away from cover, or cover-to-cover moves as they're called. So I'll show you a cover to move. It's simply done with a joystick, which can be a bit confusing actually for those other games where they do a cover-to-cover move with the joystick and a button press. In The Division, it's not. It's all done with the joystick, so you're hugging around the object like that and just using the joystick to move around. That can be a little bit kerfuddling, because you might actually, rather than that, want to press the X button and you leap out. Once you're stuck in cover, Sometimes when you're under fire or something, it's difficult to get away quick enough. But we have a combat roll, and that's particularly useful. That buys a lot of time in firefights. Grenade throwing is really easy. You just select your grenade, and let's see if I can remember it, with a little quick tap, and you have this kind of idea of radius, and you can place it where you want, so it's quite well done. What else about the gameplay? So that's the core game combat mechanics. Picking up things, interacting with things, usually done with a square button, no big deal. No quick time events or anything like that to worry about. Most ammo and collectibles you run over and you collect, so you're not even having to pick them up. Items you run over and you press square, and you go into your options menu. You can see them instantly in the inventory. So let's talk a little bit about the inventory very quickly. And there's an array of stats. The depth of stats and presentation in that respect in the game is quite in depth. Very well done. It's much meatier than Destiny and much more of a reflection of other MMOs. So you can see that we have my primary weapons here, for instance. If on the right you see the selected box, and it will give you the special talents. It has things that you've added to it. It's pretty good. You learn all of these attributes and things on your way up in the leveling process, and none of it's particularly that complicated. The character, the three primary stats, which are the primary DPS, toughness and skill power, affecting the way that your character does particular tasks. You get a whole slew of stats here that help you if especially when you're higher up, to tweak things and unlock other kind of skills on your equipment and weapons. You can balance it and vary it as you wish. You have a pouches screen here, which is just stats really. It's almost needless because the inventory can tell you everything, but it's all amalgamated there. And an appearance which is separate from your gear, which are items that are purely cosmetic and change the majority of the way that your character looks. And on your travels you're going to pick up so many, so there's a huge choice there. And no, it's not true, people do not run around looking exactly the same thing. There's an awful lot of different looks and styles. So that is gameplay, and now we're going to move on to sound and music. In terms of sound and music, it's good, but what's lacking for me a lot of the time is the implementation of a musical soundtrack. And I mean that when you're exploring the environment. When you're exploring the environment, when you're doing your open world stuff and you're out in the city and everything, the game relies a lot on sound effects, which is good in one respect, because it gives you the atmosphere of being in this deserted city, and really adds an element of storytelling or environmental storytelling to it through sound. I can see why that was a decision made, but occasionally, as you wander around, very occasionally, you get this beautiful synth music score come up, and it's all too brief, and I would have liked that to be a little bit more stated, because it really is nice. And then that music, that synth music, really does add to the atmosphere of the game. In terms of when cutscenes or in dramatic set piece battles and things, the music is up there, really good, really suits what's going on, can be quite epic, kind of, you know, really movie-like, very good. So overall, the sound quality is fantastic. The shots fired from your weapons vary from weapon to weapon. You can hear ricochets. There's lots of little sound bites from the characters that are wandering around, and they say lots of different things.
Hey man, where you been?
Absolutely wonderful. And you do get music from radios and things. There's a radio station, just like in Grand Theft Auto 5. You get like a kind of radio here. And if you don't like the radio, oh, shoot it. So overall, yes, very good job by the sound department, and especially the composer. It's done a wonderful job to add nicely placed scores at appropriate moments. Just the one thing lacking for me was perhaps a little bit more while we're exploring the big environment of Manhattan. Now we're going to go on to story, narration, and characterization. In terms of story, it is certainly much better than Destiny in terms of the way it's integrated, in terms of how it builds to the, at the moment, the end battle, if you like, of the main story campaign. Overlaying that are lots and lots of collectibles, lots of little bits of intel to collect, and all of it, regardless of how you're gathering it, adds to this main story and the atmosphere. So the main story being this horrendous, deadly viral outbreak in New York, and then you get involved in the story and eventually learn how it came to be, who was responsible, and all of this stuff. It certainly does give a really good, solid foundation, reason for being out there in the city and shooting lots of different gangs and mobs and NPCs. And also every side mission has enough storytelling, enough information about it, so you're not just going from one side mission to the other as a repetitive task without really any reason for doing so other than loot, which is obviously a big part of the Division gathering, and any RPG, any MMO experience. It's always about, you know, a big part of it, not all of it, sorry, but a big part of it is level progression, item progression, etc. It constantly improving your character. That is the heart of role-playing games, all the way back to Dungeons and Dragons being the granddaddy of all role-playing games, and the one core aspect to that game was leveling up, getting more gold, defeating more monsters by getting better magical items, etc. And those core aspects have not changed for decades. Dungeons and Dragons is the basis for all modern computer RPGs and games of that ilk, whether they are virtual or board games or other role-playing games, all come back down to Dungeons and Dragons, which was the first game that ever did that, and was hugely successful because of it. And now we see it developed here, the same aspects. So narration is that then. The narration is constant from different sources, adding into the story, whether that are the main characters actually telling you things, or if you've gone from little mobile phones that are scattered around the place, or documents or whatever. The characterization of the main characters I felt was quite well. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more, actually, to be honest. but the major cutscenes are quite rewarding, and they're interesting characters. They're distinct from each other. They all have their quirks, and they're all well presented. A very good job all around. And so comparing this to Destiny, which is, I suppose, its nearest competitor, dare I say, even though it's a completely different genre and a different kind of idea concept as an FPS, the Division is miles ahead. Not as developed, obviously, as Grand Theft Auto 5, but it's not bad at all for what it is, and I'm hoping in the future that there will be more story placed in the Division, as I know that at the moment they're concentrating more on different ways of playing a game, different kind of game modes and exciting ideas like that. But I would like to see a return to some storytelling, some kind of mission structures and things like that, because that's the type of thing I like. And it's reminiscent of The Last of Us in certain respects. It's not The Last of Us again. It's not a completely story-driven game, but it has those kind of atmospheric touches and things like that that draw you in into this virtual recreation of Manhattan and this fictional scenario. So I am now going to move to my conclusions and my final score. So overall, my conclusions about this game, having played it so intensively and almost making up for all the hours I haven't put into it, which I'd put into Destiny. Actually, it's incredible, is the only way of putting it. I haven't been really drawn to a game like this for a very, very long time. And I think that it ticks all the boxes that I could possibly want from this kind of experience. It's got the leveling up, which is slower paced than Destiny, takes more time, feels more rewarding. It's got loot like no tomorrow. You know, you might, like me, get to a point where you go, oh, my gear scores like this is probably going to take ages. Then you go off and do something and the game rewards you. So it doesn't really matter what you're doing, the game will reward you for doing it. I love that aspect to it. It's balanced, the loot drops at the right rate to keep it interesting. As I've said, the graphics just blow me away. The soundtrack and the music all adds to that. The gameplay is solid enough. Yeah, at times it's a little bit sluggish, or how can I put it, a little bit awkward to use, but that's part of the challenge of the game. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with it. It's just the style of the gameplay, and it's just an incredible experience.
Haven't seen much kindness lately.
So glad that I, for want of a better word, discovered the Division. I could so easily just not got involved with it. But to tell you the truth, the past 2 weeks of playing this game has been an absolute joy. And I think that's about as high a praise as you can give a game. So I'm going now to give you my final scores. Thank you so much for watching and listening.
Always worth a shot.
Ciao!